What if the person you're still grieving never actually existed? Not the way you believed they did, not in the way you built your sense of safety around, not in the way you whispered their name when you talked about what love was supposed to feel like. What if you didn't lose a relationship? You lost an illusion. And what if that distinction, that one terrifying, liberating distinction, is the very thing standing between you and the rest of your life? Because here's what I know to be true. Some of the heaviest grief we carry is not for the dead. It is for the living, for the people who are still walking around in the world, breathing our air, maybe even texting us occasionally, but who are not, and perhaps never were, who we needed them to be. And we don't know how to grieve that. Nobody taught us. There's no ritual for it, no language for it. But you are carrying it right now, in your chest, in the story you replay at 2 a.m. So stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is not comfortable, but it is true. And the truth, even when it breaks something open, is always, always the beginning of freedom. What if the most painful grief you ever experience isn't over someone who died, but over someone who is still alive, still breathing, still walking around in your world, but who is no longer who you believed them to be? We don't have funerals for this kind of loss. Nobody sends flowers. Nobody brings casseroles. Nobody sits with you while you mourn the person you thought existed, the relationship you thought was real, the version of someone you had built your entire sense of safety around. But this grief is real. It is bone deep and confusing and wildly misunderstood, because you're not just losing a person, you're losing a story. You're losing the version of your past where everything meant something good. You're losing the narrative you told yourself about who loved you, who saw you, who was safe. And here's what makes it even harder. You feel like you're not allowed to grieve them because they're still there. But the person you loved, that version, that's gone. And pretending otherwise doesn't protect you. It imprisons you. This grief has no roadmap, no timeline, no cultural container, and yet millions of people are sitting with it silently right now, wondering why they can't just move on. What if the story you keep torturing yourself with, "I should have seen the signs," is actually the cruelest lie shame ever told you? After a betrayal, after discovering someone wasn't who you believed, the mind immediately turns on itself. We replay every conversation, every moment, every red flag we now assign meaning to in hindsight. We become detectives of our own heartbreak, building a case against ourselves. But here's the devastating truth about manipulation, about people who aren't safe. They are often extraordinarily good at making you feel seen, loved, and chosen, precisely because that is how they operate. You didn't miss signs because you were foolish. You trusted because you were human. You believed because you were wholehearted. And wholehearted people don't walk into relationships expecting betrayal. That is not a flaw. That is the very thing worth protecting in yourself. Shame wants you to believe that your trust was stupidity. Courage knows it was vulnerability. And vulnerability is not weakness. It is the most accurate measure of how fully you were showing up. You did not fail, you were failed. And learning the difference between those two sentences is where healing begins. What if their deception didn't just break your trust in them, it broke your trust in yourself? This is the part nobody talks about. When someone we love turns out to be fundamentally different from who we believed them to be, it doesn't just shatter the relationship, it shatters our internal compass. Suddenly, we can't trust our own instincts, our own memories, our own interpretations of reality. We begin to wonder, if I was this wrong about them, what else am I wrong about? This is called identity fracture, and it is one of the most disorienting, terrifying, and rarely named experiences a human being can go through. Because you are not just grieving them, you are grieving yourself. The version of you who felt certain, the version of you who felt safe in your own perception, the version of you who could walk into a room and trust what you saw. Healing from this is not about rebuilding the old self. It's about building a new self that is wiser, more boundaried, more deeply honest, a self that doesn't need other people to confirm reality, but one that has learned to trust the quiet whisper of its own knowing, even when that knowing is uncomfortable. What if letting go has nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with freedom? We have been sold a cultural lie that says you cannot move on until you forgive, and that forgiveness means minimizing, excusing, or reconciling. That lie keeps millions of people trapped in cycles of guilt because they are told that their inability to just forgive means they are bitter, broken, or spiritually behind. Let me dismantle that completely. Letting go is not about them. It is not for them. It is not a gift you give the person who hurt you. It is a decision you make about where you will live in the past, in the wound, in the story of what was done to you, or in the present, in your own life, in the truth of who you are becoming. You can let go of someone without excusing them. You can release a story without pretending it didn't happen. You can stop carrying a weight without agreeing the weight was fair. Letting go simply means you are no longer willing to let what happened to you 5 years ago determine what is possible for you today. That is not forgiveness. That is sovereignty. And sovereignty is yours to claim. What if the very armor you built to protect yourself from being hurt again is the exact thing keeping you from being healed? After a deep betrayal, after loving someone who turned out to be unsafe, the psyche does something brilliantly self-protective and quietly devastating. It builds walls. We stop being vulnerable. We become hypervigilant. We learn to detect threat everywhere. We pull back. We perform fine. We become fluent in not needing anything from anyone. And for a while, that armor works. Nothing can get in to hurt you. But here's the brutal cost. Nothing can get in at all. Not love, not connection, not belonging, not the very things that heal the wound the armor was built to protect. We are not meant to live behind walls. We are wired for connection in a way that makes isolation quietly lethal, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, in the way that a light dims when the power is slowly cut. The research is clear and the lived experience is undeniable. The only way out of the pain of broken connection is through new, earned, boundaried, real connection. The armor doesn't save you. It just makes you harder to reach. And it makes you harder to reach for yourself too. What if the collapse of everything you thought was true is not the end of your story, but the most honest beginning you have ever had? There is something that happens after the grief, after the identity fracture, after the armor is slowly, carefully removed, something that cannot be planned or rushed or fabricated. It is the emergence of a self that is no longer built on what other people told you was real, a self built on what you now know in your body and your bones to actually be true. This is not a motivational concept. It is earned territory. It is the result of doing the terrifying work of sitting with the discomfort of not knowing who you are for a while and choosing to stay present with that uncertainty rather than filling it with distraction, busyness, or the next relationship that promises to tell you who you are again. Identity after betrayal is not about going back to who you were before. That person trusted the wrong map. You are building new cartography, one drawn from your own experience, your own values, your own hard-won clarity. And the person who emerges from that process, they are not broken. They are not bitter. They are not defined by what was done to them. They are defined by what they chose to do with it. What if the most painful thing that ever happened to you was not the moment someone hurt you, but the moment you realized you had been loving a version of them that only ever existed in your own hopeful, generous, wholehearted imagination? We talk about heartbreak like it's about loss, and it is, but there's a specific kind of heartbreak that doesn't get enough light. The heartbreak of discovering that the person you built your world around, the person whose face you saw when you thought about safety, about home, about being known, was not fully real. Not the way you understood them to be. And when that happens, something in us breaks that goes far deeper than the relationship itself. It breaks the story, it breaks the past, because now every memory is contaminated by the question, was any of it true? Did I matter to them the way I believed I did? Was that laugh real? Was that moment real? Was I real to them? That is a grief that has no cultural container. That is a loss with no funeral, no flowers, no casseroles, no permission to fall apart in public. And yet millions of people are carrying it silently in their bodies, in their sleep, in the way they flinch when someone gets too close. You are allowed to grieve a living person. You are allowed to mourn a version of someone that turned out not to be true. You are allowed to feel the full weight of that loss without being told to just move on or be grateful for the lesson or everything happens for a reason. Sometimes things happen because people are not safe, and acknowledging that is not bitterness. It is clarity. And here is where it gets harder before it gets better. Because after the grief comes the guilt, the relentless, exhausting, shame-fueled inner courtroom where we put ourselves on trial for not knowing sooner. I should have seen it. I should have known. The signs were there. I just chose not to look. That story is a lie that shame tells you to keep you small. Because here's what's actually true. People who are unsafe, people who present one face to the world and live another privately, are often extraordinarily skilled at making you feel chosen, making you feel seen, making you feel like, finally, here is someone who gets me. You didn't miss the signs because you were naive. You trusted because you were human. You believed because you were showing up with your whole heart, and wholehearted people do not walk into love expecting to be deceived. That is not a flaw to correct. That is a quality worth protecting. Shame wants you to believe that your trust was stupidity. Truth knows it was courage, and courage always, always costs something. The question is not whether the cost was worth it. The question is what you're going to do with what you know now. Because what happens after betrayal, after the grief, after the guilt, is something even more disorienting that we almost never name. It is the fracturing of your own identity, the quiet, terrifying moment when you realize, if I was this wrong about them, can I trust anything I believe? Can I trust my own perception, my own memory, my own reading of people and situations and rooms? This is what I call identity fracture. And it may be the most painful part of the whole journey because it's not just about them anymore. It's about you. It's about your relationship with your own knowing. And when that breaks, you don't just feel lost in the relationship, you feel lost in yourself. Healing from this is not about finding your old self again. That self trusted a map that turned out to be wrong. Healing is about building new cartography. It's about learning slowly, through patience and self-compassion, and often a great deal of sitting in very uncomfortable silence, to trust the quiet voice inside you that knew something was off long before you were ready to say it out loud. And that brings me to the armor. Oh, the armor. After something breaks us open, after trust is shattered and identity is fractured, the psyche does the most brilliant, most destructive thing. It builds walls. We stop being vulnerable. We become vigilant. We learn to perform fine at an Olympic level. We become fluent in not. You can let go of someone without excusing them. You can release a story without pretending it didn't happen. You can stop carrying a weight without agreeing the weight was fair. Letting go simply means you are no longer willing to let what happened to you 5 years ago determine what is possible for you today. That is not forgiveness. That is sovereignty. And sovereignty is yours to claim. What if the very armor you built to protect yourself from being hurt again is the exact thing keeping you from being healed? After a deep betrayal, after loving someone who turned out to be unsafe, the psyche does something brilliantly self-protective and quietly devastating. It builds walls. We stop being vulnerable. We become hypervigilant. We learn to detect threat everywhere. We pull back. We perform fine. We become fluent in not needing anything from anyone. You are allowed to grieve a living person. You are allowed to mourn a version of someone that turned out not to be true. You are allowed to feel the full weight of that loss without being told to just move on, or be grateful for the lesson, or everything happens for a reason. Sometimes things happen because people are not safe, and acknowledging that is not bitterness, it is clarity. And here is where it gets harder before it gets better. Because after the grief comes the guilt, the relentless, exhausting, shame-fueled inner courtroom where we put ourselves on trial for not knowing sooner. I should have seen it. I should have known. The signs were there. I just chose not to look.